what's the one thing missing there? A true franchise center. You might have that in Poitras. Not saying you do. I'm not calling him Patrice Bergeron by any means. I'm not saying he's a franchise center yet, but he has some traits that would lead you to believe that at some point in his career, he might just be a franchise center. So again, a hell of a camp. I mean, A+ camp out of Poitras. Yeah.
Even if he doesn't make it, like the guy, it's almost like, I'm sure we'll talk about Lohrei in a second, but a guy that I think you're going with expectations high on these guys that are blue chip prospects. And they've taken a step forward. Like, again, it's the one thing if Lohrei's up a little bit later on, which we'll get to, but it's another thing to have Poitras, who could leapfrog the entire AHL. Impressive. Like, full credit to him for what he's done.
Poke the Bear is brought to you by Fanduel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 167. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. Connor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. We got less than a week until regular season hockey kicks off. Thank God. As I was watching Thursday night's game, Rangers Bruins, it's like, man, so many NHL guys out here. This game just doesn't count. And at that point, it's like in the preseason, I think I've said this to you before, I don't particularly care too much about the established NHL players. You can look for little things. Oh, is the power play working? This and that. But if I want to see them on the ice, I want to see the games count. I like the preseason for the younger guys, the prospects, which we'll focus on a lot in this show. So I am done with preseason hockey. I am over it. That is it. And I'm happy that the Bruins, actually, it's funny. Like, I'm happy the Bruins are done with it, but I feel like the Bruins could actually use one more preseason game just to maybe shore a few things up. But I don't think they really need another one, because I think there's a lot of things that are done with this team, or should be at least. And one thing, we're recording this Friday at 2:15 p.m. So Jim Montgomery said earlier on Friday, nothing is imminent on roster cuts. So we're not expecting anything on Friday or today. So maybe sometime this weekend. What do you think? You think we get any surprises? When do you think the roster stuff starts happening?
I imagine you'll probably get more clarity after practice on Saturday. It's not to say that once we finish recording this, something will inevitably happen at like 5 o'clock on Friday. But Montgomery mentioned that, even though preseason's done, I think Saturday you're going to see a lot of scrimmages for their practices. So I think they still want to give maybe those 1 or 2 or 3 final spots where there's, 2 or 3 guys up, fighting for one role. Imagine they see what happens in scrimmage, see how they build off of that, and then start making some moves there. Because I think ideally, once you turn the clock and to next week, and they're not going to practice on Sunday, go into Monday and kind of have your group settle down. It was already a step forward today, where it was finally down to one group for practice, which is always great. But I think that's kind of the next step, is get some more scrimmages in, get some more battles, and then kind of assess from there and kind of see where you're at. So again, I don't expect anything groundbreaking today on Friday. But that's kind of where we are. That's kind of where we are right now, though.
Yeah, I agree. They're gonna have to do like a Hunger Games style thing to get down to the final roster, because it's just been so close. We'll start here with Poitras. So last Saturday, Bruins were off. There were no big tournaments in the area that I had to go watch. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go with my friends over to Harpoon Fest. It's like Oktoberfest. They have it at Harpoon. It's fun. It's a good time. Try different things, try different drinks and stuff like that. So it was cool. And me and my friend, his name's, but one of my friends' name's Nick Hart. He's a season ticket holder, actually. And he said, what do you think of Poitras? And this was back last Saturday. So it's a week ago. And I said, he's been great. But I think going back to the OHL is the move. I think exactly what we said. We keep what we say on here is the same things we say off of here. And he's like, I don't know. I think they may have something. I'm like, no, man, like, you don't want to rush these things. Go back to OHL and we'll see. And then this past weekend and a lot changed. And so he came over on Thursday night when the game was on. And I live with a bunch of my friends from UMass, and one of them has a bunch of their friends over to watch Thursday Night Football. And so the Bruins were on as well. So we had the 2 TV setup. And the first thing he says is like, oh, so Evan, when's Poitras going back to the OHL? And I'm like, you got me. And so it's clear. I mean, it's clear. Like, you know, but I don't think we were wrong in our initial takes. I think we went off the what we had, and he's proven us wrong, thankfully, which is not a bad thing. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, for every Lucic, for every like Bergeron, his training camp, and again, that's not to compare him to these guys, right? I'm just saying in terms
poor
of
Raycroft. Poor Raycroft was like, this kind of reminds me of when he was. People were like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, he was in his training camp.
I tweeted something with how broadcasters are comparing him to like how Cole Caulfield was compared to Lionel Messi. I don't remember that. I meant that in terms of the TNT broadcasters were like, oh, Bergeron. You see a lot of Bergeron in him. It's like, no. Like what like Andrew Raycroft and a few other guys are saying, it's just that he's continuing to exceed expectations, keeps on building every new practice, every new preseason game. Seems like he's getting better and more comfortable. For every one of the Poitras or Lucic or Bergeron, these guys who they're promising prospects, but they go into camp thinking, the conventional thing is they're at least a year away, to then go ahead and put themselves in a spot where they leapfrog, the AHL and go right to the NHL. It's impressive, but it's not, I don't think, a fluke, or it's not anything like that. It's Poitras has made the most of these opportunities. It's not like there was just one game where you see that flash of potential. It's every game he's passed a different test. So like he starts off, all right, he's a gifted playmaker. We'll get that confidence building early by giving you some reps with Pastrnak and Marchand. Does well there. All right, we're going to put you on a second leg of a back-to-back, play both games. Had tired legs, still fought through and had that highlight reel goal against the Capitals. And then I think you look at most people are, I think, ready to, stamp his spot on the roster after that game against Washington. Then all of a sudden he goes out there again on Thursday, get put into more of where he might start the year at the NHL level on the third line between guys like Geekie and Frederick, established NHL players, but it's not like having David Pastrnak on your line. And once again, they drive play. And it's not just Poitras. Like, I think you look at Frederick and Geekie, who have been kind of up and down during preseason, which, again, I wouldn't put too much stock into that, but I think it was the most cohesive you've seen those two guys as well next to Poitras. Not to say that he's elevating them, but that line looked effective into what their role was. So, we've always been high on Poitras. I think we did like our prospect overview back in July. We said he had a higher ceiling than even guys like Lysell or what have you, but we still thought he's a year away. I think that's the cautious and sound approach to have, I think, these guys. A guy who's only had 2 full years in the OHL because of COVID. He didn't play in 2020, really. So, no, but full credit to him and the Bruins for giving him that opportunity early on, and he's made the most of it. And I think, barring something catastrophic, he's sure as shit is making this team on October 11th. Then the next test is whether or not he can stay long term. So, but it's I think a credit to him in and of itself that he's in line to start with this team on October 11th.
Yeah, I mean, again, 5 points in 5 games. I thought the most impressive was that Washington game because it was the second night of a back-to-back. Faced Kuznetsov's line for a lot of that game. Took his bumps. Didn't have a perfect game by any means, but still scores a goal. Still is impactful in other ways. And never really gives up on a shift, which I find to be obviously a really good trait to have in a potential impact NHL player, especially at 19 years old. So again, it's a good thing. It's and again, the Bruins also try to overseason guys. So I think for me, I kind of looked at it as he's probably a year away anyway, but the Bruins, if I think, he's a year away, the Bruins sure as hell think he's a year away. But he played his way into it. Like, you just look at the camp he's had. And again, it's the little things. It's not just the goal scoring. It's not just the points. It's winning battles. It's, taking a hard hit and then getting right back in the action, like things like that, that mean a lot. Now I want to get to this because you mentioned, like today or Friday in practice, he played between Frederick and Geekie. For some reason, I was kind of under the assumption that if he was going to make this team, he was going to slot somewhere in the top 6, and Coyle would go down to the third line, which I don't know. I kind of like that idea a little better just because I think Coyle's such an advantage on that third line, and you sort of elevate Poitras, let him play with, Marchand and DeBrusk, if that's who he was next to establish NHLers who can kind of help him along. What do you think? What do you think they do? And what do you think of potentially him being on that third line?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine with this upcoming 9-game sample size they have, I think it's almost a trial run for a lot of guys up front, right? Where you look at Poitras, of course, the biggest thing is, can he hang long term? He deserves full credit for making it, accelerating his timeline substantially. But if he goes through 9 games and has one helper and he's getting really knocked across the ice and he's got tired legs and all these things, then for sure. But I think if you put him in that third line to start off, as much as I think people want him to just run with, Marchand and DeBrusk, I think you start him off on that third line, see if he can hold his own, see if he can build something with those guys. And then I think you're not evaluating just Poitras, but you're evaluating Coyle and Zacha, right? Like for Coyle, I think he had a pretty solid game against the Rangers, but let's see how they build off of it. There's still question marks about how he meshes with DeBrusk and Marchand. Like, is he better suited for that third line role? So let's say you get into 9 games and Poitras looks like he belongs and Coyle is been solid but not generating as much. Then I think once you know for sure if you have a guy that's going to be here full time in Poitras, then you can start tweaking things a little bit more, right? Of like, all right, he's here to long term. We know he can, he can be solid on the third line because he's proven it over those last 9 games. Can he give more up in the top 6? Because I agree with you. I think if Poitras belongs this year and he's driving play, not to say that this guy is going to be friggin' Braden Point or anything like that, but if he's a guy that you play the whole year and give you 40 points of solid play, which would be above and beyond what you're expecting, then it opens the door for, all right, I can see the appeal of putting him with Marchand and DeBrusk, 2 elite wingers that can ease him into that role, along with getting the most out of a guy like Charlie Coyle, who I think third line is still where he's best utilized. And he also has a lot of good chemistry with Frederic. So I don't imagine you're going to see on October 11th them put Poitras in the top 6 and Coyle down to 3C. But if Poitras proves that he can stay over the first 2 weeks and maybe Coyle is not as impactful as they want, then I think that opens the door in terms of really kind of tweaking things. But I think first and foremost, you need to see whether or not Poitras belongs up here beyond the end of October, early November. Snap into action this NFL season with Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Now is the best time to join Fanduel. The app is easy to use and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. And frankly, that's the best part about Fanduel, is that you can bet on anything. You want to bet on how many touchdowns Mac Jones is going to throw this year? Be my guest. Maybe how many wins the Bruins are going to have in 2023-24. Go for it. You can really do it all. So bet now on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
I think you nailed it on the Coyle part. I think it's also to give Coyle a legit look in the top 6. I mean, you think about his entire time he's been here, Krejci, Bergeron, and then, obviously the year when Krejci wasn't here, it was, Eric Holla. There's always been competition for the top 6 for him. And he's never really had an extended look there as a center. I don't think ever. And this was kind of supposed to be the season that you really get to see Coyle in a top 6 role. There was nobody else that was going to kind of work their way in there. I know, like we kind of mentioned Geeky, but the jury's still kind of out on that. I think it's also kind of a move to, hey, here's the veteran guy. We're paying him $5.25 million. We always kind of expected to be a top 6 center. Let's really see what we have in him as a top 6 center with DeBrusk and Marchand. So I think it's also that element of it too. Like, let's give Poitras a runway into the NHL. He's not going to play, a ton of minutes, for top 6 minutes, but he's still going to play a fair amount. Maybe you get some mismatches with Poitras on the third line. You're going against guys that are not as offensive as he is. But I think it's also the Coyle element of it too, where it's like, hey, let's see him in the top 6. But again, I think it's a good problem to have because, again, I think we said it on Bruins Beat, like, you have a potential. I mean, you have a top 6 center in the system now, potential franchise type center. At least kind of has the mold of that. That's pretty good. You didn't know you had that a couple months ago, and now you do. And I think that opens up a lot of different opportunities down the road. We've said it we have said this 1,000 times. They don't need to blow this up. The core is there. McAvoy, Lindholm, Pasternak, throw in DeBrusk, temporarily Marchand, Swayman. Want to throw in Zaka. I mean, you have to throw in Zaka in that. But what's the one thing missing there? A true franchise center. You might have that in Poitras. Not saying you do. I'm not calling him Patrice Bergeron by any means. I'm not saying he's a franchise center yet. But he has some traits that would lead you to believe that at some point in his career, he might just be a franchise center. So again, a hell of a camp. I mean, A+ camp out of Poitras. Yeah. I mean,
even if he doesn't make it, like the guy, it's almost like, I'm sure we'll talk about Lohrei in a second, but a guy that I think you go in with expectations high on these guys that are blue chip prospects, and they've taken a step forward. Like, again, it's one thing to if Lohrei's up a little bit later on, which we'll get to, but it's another thing to have Poitras who could leapfrog the entire AHL. Impressive. Like, full credit to him for what he's done.
I mean, when was the last time a Bruins prospect had super high expectations and then found a way to exceed them in camp? Like,
yeah, I mean, because even like Pasternak still had 25 games, I think that really benefited him. But he was a guy that I think immediately you saw him at like the first dev camp. You're like, all right, this guy's got something here, but he's got to work on his game. Like Sagan, I know went right from getting drafted to the NHL, but he was a number 2 pick. People thought he could have been number 1, right? So like that's another thing in and of itself. Like, I think you look at like Lucic and Bergeron, who were 2nd round picks, showed that they had a lot to give and were guys that could be future NHLers, but to then prove that at, 18, 19 years old, very, very impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think so again, it's a good thing here. Even if he doesn't last the 9 games, I expect him to make the team though. I mean, I think he's done it because again, he's done everything. If in the event he does not make it to opening night, that's a huge, like, what are you doing? Like, this kid came in, had the best training camp he could possibly have. And it's like, all right, we'll see you next year. I'm not saying they're doing that, but if they do, that is not good. That is not good. By the way, I just took a look at the waiver wire.
Nothing.
No Bruins, but a couple former Bruins. You got on there Austin Czarnik. You got Carson Kuhlman.
Yes.
I think that's it. I don't think there's any other former Bruins on there. Local guy, Billy Sweezy on that list.
Yes.
So there's that. But yeah, no Bruins on that, thankfully, yet. Mason Lohrei. Really interesting week for him. I think he's had a good camp. But that's one guy I don't think my opinion's changed on. I think Providence is the right move for him to start. I see increasingly more and more people online saying, oh, but Derek Forbort has been terrible, which, by the way, Derek Forbort has not had a good training camp, I don't think. But again, veteran player, plays very different minutes than Mason Lohrei would play. What do you think of where Lohrei's at right now?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think full credit to Lohrei for taking another step forward. I think you see the things we expected, right? The offensive game is there, puck moving, all that stuff. I think almost similar to Poitras, every game he showed a little bit more of growth in terms of areas that we thought he needed work in, right? Like, I think you hear about his skating, his D-zone play, had a couple of really good breakouts earlier on in preseason where he was really solid with the puck, wasn't making ill-advised passes, wasn't coughing the puck up against the forecheck, anything like that. So that's another thing you check off, like, all right, this guy's learning on the fly. I think you look at this past game against the Rangers, he's pretty much put in a shutdown role with Carlo. I think they had under 30% ozone start times. Bruins still outshot the Rangers 4-1, outscored the Rangers 1-0 with those two guys out on the ice. It wasn't like a flashy game for Lohrei by any means, but was consistently solid, which again, I think is that last piece of the puzzle with Lohrei, right? That being said, like, I think Lohrei has taken a huge step forward. And I think we all expected that, like, going into this camp, he's going to see some of that flash, some of that skill, some of that poise of the puck, but we're going to see a lot of, like, he needs some work there. And I think he still does, but I think he's gone from a guy that we expected maybe needed the whole year in Providence, that I still think the best course is to start the year in Providence for him, but mostly because you're going to have more reps available down there. Like, unless like the Bruins think that he's a guy that they can put up with McAvoy or put with Carlo, and they put Lindholm with McAvoy or what have you, they think he's ready for that jump. I think the best thing to do is start the year in Providence, where you can get 22, 23 minutes a night, and especially power play time. That's like the one thing. If you want this guy to eventually be your power play quarterback, I don't think he's going to leapfrog McAvoy or Lindholm or Shattenkirk or any of these other guys.
Or Grizzlick.
Or Grizzlick. Like, there's a lot of guys in place there that he'd be pretty far down on the ladder for. So I'm sure Bruins fans probably don't want to hear that, or I imagine if he does get sent down to Providence, there'll be a lot of uproar. But again, you look at just the inevitability of injuries. You look at the promise he's shown, and the fact that, like, again, you've got a lot of established guys on your defense, but there's spots that can be pretty fluid, right? Like, if Forbort is struggling at 5-on-5 play, if Shattenkirk is not giving you enough in that role, like, you can switch things around and accommodate a guy like Lohrei if, he's down in Providence playing 23 minutes a night, and you're looking at the end of November and he's got 18 points in 26 games and is playing really sound hockey, then you evaluate. It's the same thing with like Pastrnak, right? Like, people probably were really pissed at Pastrnak, who had a lot of flash during his first camp, needed some time to work on his game, proved that he belonged there and earned a call up, and then never went back down, right? So I think you kind of view it as the same way with Lohrei, that as much as I think people really want to get this whole, I think especially with Poitras, everyone wants the youth movement now to be in full swing, like the floodgates are open. Lohrei, I think, has taken a huge step forward, and I would not be surprised if he's here at some point this year and maybe doesn't come back down, doesn't go back down to Providence. I just don't think it's right now. I think you give him those early reps, see if he builds off of this camp and kind of go from there. But he's on his way. Like, he's looked a lot better than I think we were expecting going into this camp.
Exactly. I expect him to be up at some point this year, 100%. And again, also injuries happen. Like, aside from bad play, like, injuries take place and you need guys to fill in. But again, I think he moves the puck like a pro. Like that, puck moving, offensive abilities. You see that goal against Washington, him recognizing, even with McAvoy jumping into the play, the fact that he stepped up too. Like, offensively, puck moving wise, breakouts wise, NHL player, no doubt about it. But as you said, there's still some things in his game that, I think Providence will help with, whether it's structure in the defensive zone, whether it's just better D zone play, defending professional players, I think is just something that, takes time with defensemen. And I think that, being down in Providence, as you said, playing as the number one defenseman, playing, a ton, power play, throwing some penalty kill. Like, I think that's a good thing. There's no rush. And as you said, there's a log jam of NHL defensemen at the NHL level. Like, it's not like they're rebuilding and it's like, you know what, we're going to have, a Patrick Brown, like, if you had someone like Patrick Brown on D, right? Like, oh, we're going to have them or Lohrei. I'll go with Lohrei.
Right.
Or as Montgomery said, call him Low Rider on the TNT broadcast, Low Rider, which is a great nickname. But I just, to me, like, there's no rush. There's no rush. And I know I said the same stuff about Poitras, but I think with Lohrei, it's a little more defined. It's not as urgent and time. And he also can go to Providence. Poitras cannot go to Providence. There's the difference. So again, I think Lohrei has had an amazing camp. He's done great, taken strides, much better player. I think you now know pretty well that he's going to be a top 4 defenseman in the next 2 years. So I think that that's a very good thing to have coming out of this camp. So there is that. Other roster stuff. We talked about this a little on Bruins Beat. Actually, let's hit Derek Forbort real quick before we go on to the fourth line, because Forbort's gotten a lot of stuff on Twitter, and he has not looked great. I'm not the highest on Forbort. I think he provides value, penalty kill, tough minutes, shutdown minutes, minutes that you don't want to give to a guy like Lohrei, at least to start. He's also a veteran player. Things take time. So I'm not ready to sound the alarm yet on a guy like Forbort. What about you? Where are you at with this?
Yeah, I kind of view it the same way as almost like the Coyle thing, where, not to say that I think Coyle is running the risk of being out of the lineup, but I think you see where where you're at with Forbort. And again, if you have Lohrei down in Providence excelling and Forbort is great on the PK, which I don't imagine that's going to slip anytime soon, but if he's leaving a lot to be desired on that third pairing during 5-on-5 play, it's something you assess a little bit down the road, right? If you get into November and you're still kind of finding a weak link on that defense on that third pairing, and you got to switch some things around because, again, we've said it before, your defense needs to be the bedrock of your successes here, then I think you evaluate. But I don't see it as being a situation where I'm expecting Forbort or someone to get moved between now and October 11th. But again, we said this even before the camp started, that there's going to be a pretty fluid lineup. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of new guys in there. So I don't imagine it being something where Forbort's out of the lineup to start the year, but you have to keep tabs on that, right? Because especially if a guy like Lohrei is playing well, got to make room somehow, right? Again, patience should be preached there, but if he looks like he belongs and you're getting into around Thanksgiving time and he's still playing at a high level, got to free up a spot somewhere.
I agree. That is one of those things you do have to watch over the first couple of months. Same goes, by the way, for Shattenkirk, who has also not had the greatest training camp. A little slow at times. A lot of the guys they got, very slow. They did not get any speedsters this offseason. Lucic has looked pretty good, I think. Lucic had a good game against Washington. Again, not saying he's going to be a top 6 forward, but good offensive awareness. I know he's always had that, but definitely good to see out of number 17. Fourth line center role. I know we talked about this a little on Bruins Beat earlier this week. Beecher versus Brown. I know today or Friday at practice, Brown played with Lauko and I'm blanking on
Brown, Lucic, and Lauko.
Lucic, literally who I was just talking about, who we've kind of assumed would make sense as a fourth line. We both agree it should be Beecher, because I think Beecher's been solid this camp, good enough to make the team. Brown has not been wicked impressive to me. What do you think they end up doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I still think I'm in the camp of Beecher in that spot because I think he's played more consistently. And I think if you're looking at the identity you want in that line, again, Lucic is moving pretty well, but it's still, I don't think he's going to win any foot races. I think you need speed on that line. Like, I think you look at all these teams across the NHL that are doing well. A lot of the checking units are that blend of speed with, that suffocating forechecking ability. Look at like Carolina, you look at like Vegas, all those guys are maybe not the burliest guys out there, but they will rack up 7-8 hits a night. They are, buzzing in the offensive zone. I think if you have Beecher and Lauko doing that, and you have Lucic adding that extra thump, there's a lot to like about that line. It's not to say that I think Patrick Brown's, doesn't have value. He's really good in faceoffs, hits a lot, but I think if you're looking for that more dynamic play out of that line, I like Beecher a lot more in that role, but we'll see. I mean, Friday, as you said, Brown was in that spot. Beecher was kind of in that no man's land kind of line where it's guys who may not make the team, but it might come down to just what the scrimmage is on Saturday. Like, again, I think Beecher's outplayed him, but the Bruins, if they're bringing in Poitras, if they're maybe bringing in Lohrei, we'll see. Like, maybe they counter that with a veteran like Brown and on a line that should have a lot of D-zone time. But I think Beecher's been really good for what his role has been during camp.
Yeah, to me, Beecher seems like the obvious, or not obvious, but I think Beecher's the guy there. It's time to give him a shot at 4C, and I just haven't been super impressed with Patrick Brown so far. And if you have Lucic, who is slower, do you really want to put someone who is not very fast in the middle? I don't know. I'd rather have a Beecher. And I think, dynamic wise and getting young guys up and playing in that bottom 6, I'd like him there. And I think he's been good in training camp so far. It just comes down to finishing chances. That's really what it comes down to with him, which again, in his role won't be the biggest thing in the world. So we'll have a better idea as the weekend rolls along, what the lineup's going to look like. Obviously opens Wednesday night against Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks. Can you believe it? Did you see the shootout attempt by Bedard on Thursday night? That was tough.
I did not, no.
Oh, yeah, I got to send it to you. It wasn't great. It was, shit happens. But it was his first shootout attempt, and everyone was like, oh, it's Connor Bustard. He's a bust, and it was funny because he tried to deke, and he just, toe picked himself because he tried to, Fleury kind of poke checked him, and then he tried to, through his legs, go on his forehand, and he just fell on his face, and Fleury kind of went by him and tapped him on the knee pad. So I'll send it to you. It was good. But
Good.
it's going to be fascinating to see. I'm curious what he ends up doing against the Bruins. And Taylor Hall returns. But
Yes.
and Nick Foligno.
We'll see.
Too. And Nick Foligno.
A whole reunion.
Oh, yes. Lots of tribute videos. Connor, what can people look forward to from you over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe?
Yeah, we're going to have you covered now that preseason's finally done. We'll start looking at lineup projections, questions facing the season. Might mess around, have a bold predictions post coming up soon, so we might have to tackle that next week. So we'll have you covered with everything leading up to the start of the Bruins season over at Boston.com. So please read our stuff over there. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. We're presented by our good friends over at FanDuel. You Poke the Bear listeners. Have a great rest of your week.